Thanks for tuning in to What's Your Signal, where we continue our exploration of the latest trends in network connectivity and security. As always, you're joined by me, Taylor Walker, and my co-host, Mauricio Steffen. Hey, Mauricio.
Hi, Taylor. How's it going?
It's going okay, but it's like freezing outside, so I am adapting to that. This is usually the time of year where it starts getting cold, so immediately I start thinking, what warm trip can I take, like in January or February, to thaw out a little bit?
Well, I can always use a beach and an umbrella drink. I mean, that's always what I'm thinking about, regardless of the weather.
That's how it gets. That's what gets you through the day.
Yep, just thinking about a beach and an umbrella drink and somebody fanning me with one of those giant palms and feeding me grapes. That's just how I think about my retirement and what gets me through day to day.
My hang up is that I have all these plans to go on trips, but my travel partner he really doesn't do well with flying. And so he's constantly reading stories about planes that are nearly colliding or botched landings. And recently we were looking at maybe some warm places to go. And he reminded me of the FAA system failure that was earlier this year. Do you remember that happening?
Yeah, I think I remember something about that, right? It's where the system where the pilots get the weather information for their routes and can see, it's how they plan their routes, right? In order to avoid warm air currents that cause turbulence and that kind of stuff. And it was down for, days, right?
It wasn't down that long. It was only down for about a day, but it was the first time in history that it's called the NOTAM system. It failed. So it's the Notice to Air Missions. And basically, it's just one of those systems that's essential to flight operations. And so all these flights were delayed. There was a ground stop while the system was being worked on. And then obviously, as they were working through the backlog of flights, everyone was just sitting in airports, just waiting to go places. And later, what's crazy is the FAA determined that the outage was just caused by unintentionally deleting some database files. Like some contractor was just like, I don't need this. Got rid of it, and everyone was grounded.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, didn't we talk to Todd a couple episodes about, somebody kind of doing something along those lines? Why it's so critical to have that change management in place. Just people fat finger things, and who knows the havoc it can wreak.
Yeah, it was one of the networking nightmares that we can include in a future networking nightmare episode for sure. But it does get me thinking a lot about mission critical communications and how, in that situation with the planes, there was that one system that failed, and what kind of fail stops did they have in place? What kind of backup systems did they have in place for mission critical communications? And, something that we're probably more used to is police and fire and these other first responders, and what happens in industries like public safety when mission critical communications go down and how that can be prevented.
Yeah, I don't know if you know the history of FirstNet in the United States, but FirstNet is a public safety cellular network that's managed by AT&T here in the United States, and it's got a dedicated spectrum, band 14 here in the United States, and that was dedicated by the federal government. But the history of that is back on September 11th, 2001, right? That tragedy. One of the things that they identified coming out of there was the inability of public safety to communicate with each other and cross functionally, between the police and the fire department and EMS. And so one of the things that came out of that was the idea of how critical cellular communications are for public safety, not just here in the United States, but across the world. And that led to setting aside spectrum here in the United States to specifically dedicate to public safety, especially during emergencies, to ensure just that continuity of communications for critical incidences.
That's an invaluable resource, and I definitely want to dive into that some more. So we've got a couple people here to help us with that today. We have first Rob Butts, who's a utility market manager from L3Harris Technologies, and Graham Everington, who's a Cradlepoint manager who works with many blue light agencies in the UK. So we'll really have perspectives from both sides of the globe. All right, so Graham, Rob, welcome. I want to start a little bit with some background on mission critical communication for public safety agencies. So when we say mission critical. I want to know kind of what that means to each of you and what are some of the components of mission critical communication that you each work closely with. So, Rob, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So it really depends on the industry when you say mission critical, but literally across the board for us at L3 Harris, mission critical for us really is communication where your life depends on it. So it's not best effort. It is not I hope it goes through. It is, shoot, don't shoot, those types of communications. That's what that's our bread and butter. From a corporate standpoint, L3 Harris, overall, we have a large defense business and are in theater, unfortunately, today. And mission critical for us is making sure that our men and women on the ground have the best and most reliable communications that they can possibly get. It has to work all the time. It cannot fail. That's really mission critical from a broad standpoint. Then you can also go into a couple of areas where mission critical may mean communication for IoT, right? So in the utility business, especially the electric utility business, when they turn off a breaker, they want to make sure that breaker turns off. They don't want that line to be energized. They may have, their folks or the public may be out there working, and they want to make sure that line is de-energized. And, we have to make sure those happen, that happens. So when we think of mission critical, it's life or death. That's what mission critical means to us.
Graham, how about you from a blue light perspective?
Yeah, so as you know, I work really closely with the blue light organisations in the UK, and I think you can probably define mission critical in many, many ways, like Rob has. I think from our perspective, it's maybe it could be anything. It could be an application. It could be a process. It could be a piece of equipment. It could be a member of personnel. But anything that materially, if it's impacted in a negative way, is going to have that mission critical impact upon the blue light services, which, not to be too melodramatic, could be life-changing for either that member of personnel or a member of the public, and the way that then obviously our societies and our communities are served by those services.
And Graham, what's included in blue light services?
Okay, so when I talk about blue light in the UK, predominantly that really means our police, fire, and ambulance.
Awesome. So I'm curious how some of these technologies that you guys have mentioned have evolved in recent years, and what has been the impact on safety and efficiency because of that evolution.
Okay. Do you want me
Go ahead,
to
Graham. It's your turn. You go first this time.
So I think there's a couple of things, a couple of themes around this one then, Taylor. So we as Cradlepoint support technology that probably solves problems that we didn't even know existed 10 years ago. So I think that's the key thing from an evolution point of view. And we have to be able to evolve quickly to provide the communication, the cellular communication to support those kind of technologies. So think things like real-time streaming that probably didn't exist maybe 10, 15 years ago, being able to communicate back to HQ, right down to now to maybe things around facial recognition and so on. So we constantly have to be able to evolve and see and move with those markets and move with things that are coming next. I'd say the second thing is probably with the birth of 5G, it's, well, what's next as well? So what will 5G bring us in terms of the artificial intelligence, robotics, mass IoT implementations? Also, we all talk about the cloud as well, so information traffic through the cloud, and what are the implications now with things like cybersecurity as well on those solutions? They're all things that public sector and certainly blue light organisations in the UK need to be considering at the moment.
Yeah, on our side, and Graham, I think you hit the nail on the head there. On our side, we provide soup to nuts an entire system in a lot of instances, right? So all the way from the core, which has to be up has to stay up and running. We've done a lot of work. Graham brought up cyber. That's a big deal. Used to be, especially in the public safety side of things, you didn't think about cyber because, we're public safety. They're not going to mess with us. Well, that's just not the case. On the utility side, they've been in the cyber world for a long time because folks want to mess with the grid, right? But the core is, it's essential to make sure that the core is up and running, and a lot of technology has changed in a good way over the past 10 to 15 years to allow us to have high availability, geo-redundant cores that can keep communications up and running. Then you move out to the towers. The towers have changed a lot, right? It used to be it was a power pole with an antenna on the top of it, and you hope it didn't blow over. Well, now it's dual redundant backhaul, using Cradlepoint for wireless backhaul. Those types of things, fiber optics, high frequency microwave, all those types of things have really changed the way that we build towers and we maintain towers. And then when you get down to the radio side of it, boy, have they changed, right? I mean, it is, from the simple things like battery life. Battery life has it really increased. The capability for them to do more and different things. Graham talked about, video and 5G and some of the things that can be supported now, body cams, those types of things. But just IoT from a standpoint of, from a firefighter, making sure that their tank levels are correct and that the folks out there that are commanding them know what their tank levels are, their blood pressure, their heart rate, their body temperature, all those types of things. That new innovation has really pushed the envelope to protecting the boys in blue and as well as our utility workers and the folks in the on the transit side, those types of things that really rely on mission critical communication.
So you guys talked a lot about the different types of examples of mission critical communications there in the field. Maybe want to talk a little bit about how this is improved. You touched a little bit there, Rob, about how it's improved safety for the people there on the line. But I have to imagine some of these new use cases that are enabled by cellular communication provide just a better response to things, right? Because they have the ability now to stream that video that you guys talked about and get that situational awareness. Can you kind of give some more examples of those types of things?
Yeah, absolutely. There's always been this chasm between what we call the first initiator and the first responder, right? So the man or the woman or the boy or the girl, the mom, the dad, whoever picks up that cell phone or that landline phone and makes that 911 call, that goes through the 911 operator, goes to the CAD operator, and then eventually goes out to the field. And then that information goes back. That chasm has definitely been closed for the capability for someone that's in the field, the first initiator, if they have a camera on their phone and they're doing a video call, for the first responder to be able to see that video. I mean, rather than interpretation of that video by the 911 operator and then the CAD operator, and then, trying to figure it out what's going on. So it's sort of like that game where you tell the person on one side, ABC, and by the time it comes out the other side, it's XYZ. That chasm is closing. So that's just one example of things that, where you really have that capability to be able to advance cooperation and safety.
I think Rob's right. It's the credibility, I think, of information now, how that can be quickly, efficiently streamed to the right person to make then the right decision based on the impact of the incident or whatever that they're attending. So it's that speed of data to be able to make those critical decisions now. Also, we've been able to stream information back. Does somebody else need to make that decision? For example, back at HQ, who will then be able to liaise with their guys on the ground to offer them advice, offer them instruction of what to do next in the most serious situation as well.
I mean, no advancement in technology or communication comes without a little bit of struggle too, right? So are there, Rob's like, yes.
It's not easy.
Are there, what are the pain points that come with some of these advancements in mission critical communication?
You want me to take that one first, Rob?
Go for it. You go for it, Graham.
So suppose in the UK again, there's a number of themes and interesting themes that come in from a public safety point of view. So the first thing I suppose is that coverage piece. Is how can we help organisations? I live in a far smaller country than you guys. However, we have areas of rural locations where simply cellular coverage is limited. So how can we support those kind of organisations so that they can still respond exactly the same as if they were in a big metropolitan area like the cities or London and so on. Again, I've mentioned the fact that you've got the security piece with all these new technologies. How are we going to secure those so that there's not a threat to our information, our WAN estates, etc. I think what you also find is certainly in the UK, you get a legacy of equipment as well. It's not just a case of suddenly changing to the next best thing. You've got a whole legacy of assets that we need to help also support organisations to sweat those assets and utilise them as best we can. And I think, again, not necessarily restricted to public sector in the UK or blue light, but across all organisations, it's what strategies have they had in the past around communications? Have they been reactive and ad hoc? For example, during COVID, did they come up with some kind of strategy which just isn't relevant anymore? Did they make the right decisions then? And what support can we give them to tie all of that back together from a connectivity point of view?
Yeah, I mean, Graham, I think you hit the nail on the head for where I was going on the connectivity side. You know, I'll even add the interconnectivity, right, and the interoperability. The example that I used earlier from first initiator to first responder here in the U.S. that basically goes, touches 4 or 5 vendors, right? 4 or 5 different vendors with 4 or 5 major systems that have to talk together. We've all heard of standards. Standards are great as long as everybody follows them, and everybody wants to add their flavor to the standard, right? We all want to be unique. L3 Harris is no different. But here at L3 Harris, one of the things that we really work hard on is working with other partners, other vendors that are the choosing of the customers. So, where we may support the capability to be able to work with a different EZNet vendor or a different CAD vendor, or different types of vendors, different P25 vendors for that matter. I think it's always important that you still have to figure out what's the mission of the customer, right? The mission of the customer is to provide, a seamless flow of data from point A to point B and back to point A. And that's the key. Interoperability is a big deal with that. There are some companies that believe the only way you can do interoperability is to own the entire value stream. We're not one of those companies. We really feel like that, best of breed partners are the ones that you work with, and making sure that, you have interoperability between those partners so that you can provide that overall solution. From a legacy standpoint, that's the real challenge. Graham brought it up. It's a great point. It's always the challenge because it seems like that we never have enough money to fix the whole problem, right? We only have enough money to fix part of the problem, and that's something that is always a challenge, no matter no matter where you're working.
I think you'll also find is a lot of these things come down to individuals as well, and it probably shouldn't, but how embracing are employees of new technology. I've spoken to organisations who are using WhatsApp to communicate, for example, because that's what they do in their personal lives. So there's all those kind of things as well along the way, which are obviously some challenges from a communication standpoint.
You bring up a good point there, Graham, right? Maybe you guys can touch on something that's typically referred to as like the consumerification of the enterprise or business, right? Is like a lot of people expect, the things in the consumer world have become so easy, so ubiquitous. You touch a button and it's user experience. Is that becoming a big expectation in these kind of mission critical communication applications? And maybe you guys can talk about how you guys have seen that kind of play out as well.
I think from a technology point of view, absolutely yes. Employees expect a level of technology now, but they also expect maybe to be able to use their own devices and so on. But so again, that offers up the issues around security and so on, and how things should really be done. So Rob, I don't know if you think any differently.
It's an interesting. There's a interesting example of that P25 vendors. P25 is the technology of land mobile radio that's ubiquitous across the U.S. And I think you guys over in the U.K. are Tetra standards or P25 standards, something similar, right? One of the things that's interesting is that's a narrowband technology. It's a very robust, very secure narrowband technology that has been used for years and will continue to be used along the way. But one of the things you talked about, the consumerization, whatever that word was that you used, how people think that they should be able to do anything with with their police radio or whatever that they can do with their cell phone, and one of them is GPS. GPS is a big deal, right? The GPS location, utilizing GPS, but location services. And they don't understand why in the world I can, Uber can find me and, within 20 feet, yet why is it so difficult to find a police officer using a narrowband radio? And part of that has to do with technology and passing that information across narrowband channels and, just the amount of data that's utilized. So it's been somewhat of a challenge. We've overcome some of those challenges. Well, we've overcome all of the challenges depending on how the customer wants to handle it. But it's the meshing of broadband and narrowband that fixes that problem, right? The capability to be able to say, from a mission critical standpoint, if you didn't have the broadband network, if it wasn't available for whatever reason, you could still get narrowband locations, but they may be 30 seconds apart. They may be a minute apart, but at least you have something that you can deal with. But if you want 5-second location informations of, police officers streaming down the highway in their car with the blue lights on, narrowband technology is not the greatest way to do that. Voice is more important to them. So that's just one example.
I think you'll find that ties back into that security piece as well. So you'll find that from the phrase zero trust network access will get used more and more and more. So, for example, it's not a case of have I got access anymore, yes or no. It's a case of what do I have access to, on what device, and on what connectivity piece do I get access to. So when I'm on my Cradlepoint network at home, for example, I might have access to corporate information that I need to do my job. But when I'm in a Costa coffee or a Starbucks coffee and I connect to the free Wi-Fi, do I need now access to that corporate information, or should I be allowed to have access to that information? Probably not. So it's that kind of security piece that will come in along the way as well, which will support some of the blue light agencies certainly.
Graham, when you talk about security, and I mean for that matter, some of the other pain points that you all mentioned, coverage and integrating legacy equipment and strategy execution and interoperability and all of that, what happens if any of those pieces fail? Like, what are the ramifications of those mission critical communication failures for each of these agencies?
Okay, I mean, I think from any of those pieces that start to go wrong, aren't implemented correctly, are implemented piecemeal or in the wrong way, to me, it would be a case of it affects that decision-making piece again. So I go back to that, being able to make critical decisions quickly, efficiently, to be able to do my job as a blue light personnel in the UK efficiently. I think ultimately failure to do that can have It can cause life limiting incidents for personnel, for the public. So big thing in the UK will be trust and confidence in our blue light services as well. So what do we as individuals think of the guys that are performing those duties? And do we trust the way that information is spreading and for them to be able to do that job? So there's probably a whole topic there, Taylor, I think.
I agree with that. And I think one of the big things too that you run into is you just, the more interoperability, the more capability that you give them to make decisions, the faster they can make good decisions, right? Everybody can make a decision fast, but if you don't, the more information, correct information that you have, the faster you can make the right decision or a good decision. When you lose that interoperability, when you lose those peripheral enhancements, I want to call them, that allow you to form that best decision, you still are being required, or they're still being required to make a fast decision. Now they don't have as much information, good information, to make a fast decision. And so, they have to rely on their gut, or they have to rely on, other factors that they're used to using. And I'm not saying they can't do it. Sure, they can. It's just more comfortable when you have good information that you can make the right decision.
Yeah, Rob, you talked about a few minutes ago, right, when talking about the consumerification, right, using a combination of narrowband and low band. I think that's the ability to get that information highlights the need for just redundancies and not just relying on one type of connectivity or one single connection for these systems. It requires to look across different technologies, different types of connections to ensure that if one goes down, I can move to another type of connection. It might not be an optimal one, but it's one that gives you that connectivity in order to get that information and situational awareness to make those good decisions, right?
That's correct. Graham brought up a good point earlier, and one of the things, we have customers that are using broadband only for communications, right? So they're using push to talk over broadband, using mission critical push to talk. It's the 3GPP next generation push to talk over broadband. It's not an over the top PTT over cellular app. It's a true integrated subsystem within the LTE network for push to talk, using priority and preemption and those types of things. I will tell you, it fails, or it could. I shouldn't say it fails. It hasn't failed yet, but it could fail. And when it fails, there has to be a backup. Now, in the infinite wisdom of 3GPP, which was amazing that they can, really, really smart guys in the fact that and girls, that they can come up with these types of things. They came up with ProSate, right? Proximity sensors, sensibility, the capability to be able to talk off network. The capability to be able to at least communicate with each other. It hasn't been widely deployed in any networks. And one of the things that our folks that are using our radios like about our radios is there is P25 capability in the radio, regardless of whether we're running MCPTT over broadband or not. And so they have programmed a second system in each one of the radios, which is P25 conventional, which is point to point. High, at 5 watts, you get really good coverage with something like that. And to your point, it's not optimal. As Graham said, you're not able to communicate back to headquarters potentially. But what you are able to do is you are able to communicate situationally in the area. And that's a big deal for those guys. They want that capability. They want to know, when I walk in this burning building and something goes wrong, I want to be able to communicate with somebody, because that's the only way I'm ever going to get out of here. And potentially, heaven forbid. But that's a big deal. Backup is a big deal, and redundancy is something that has to be available for them.
I think to expand slightly on what Rob was talking about, strategies have to be around resiliency being built in on day one rather than an afterthought. Be it a cellular router with 2 SIMs in, a cellular router with 4 SIMs in it, as resiliency to fiber, as resiliency to a traditional telephone line in, it has to be built in on day one and be part of a credible connectivity strategy. The blue light organizations must be looking at the moment.
What are some other best practices that you guys can share for ensuring that those types of communications stay up? Are there more beyond redundancy and failover solutions that you think are important to integrate?
Oh, absolutely. So, from a Cradle Point perspective, we would look to connect and anything that can't connect the unconnected. I think, Taylor, is the strap line. So anything where you can't get a piece of fiber or a copper connection, or as Rob has talked about, maybe some of the radio technologies. But so that could be in vehicle, that could be pop-up command, one that we probably haven't spoken about yet tonight. But so pop-up command centers where you can physically take connectivity with you. So think about drone teams. Think about Rob's story around going into a burning warehouse or so on. A drone could be connected to a Cradle Point router with live streaming back to assess which parts of the building are safe to go into, where are the exit points, where are the entry points, where might people be trapped, all of those kind of things. So certainly from that point of view, you've got that in-vehicle piece, you've got that pop-up piece from pop-up command. And we've talked a little bit about failover at satellite offices and additional coverage at satellite offices as well.
Yeah, and to expand on what Graham's saying, move back into the network a little bit further, with folks like us that supply the entire network. Redundant backhaul. I spoke about potentially using, wireless and wireline and or microwave. I mean, it takes a lot of wires to run a wireless network. You have to have connectivity, right? There's no way you can't, if you don't have connectivity from that tower back to your core, then all the people in the tower are isolated. You have to have that capability. Redundant power, you'd be surprised. I've been associated with Southern Company, one of the power companies, or the power conglomerate here in the Southeast, and they have their own private LTE network. And one of the big things that they do is they have 7 days of backup power at every single site. Now, you would think the power company would be the first people that would get their power on, but what they realize is without communications, we can't tell folks how to get the power back on. And that's a big deal, is having, redundant power supplies, redundant, power capability. And then, as you move into the core, having high availability cores and having the capability to have geo-redundant cores. It's similar to what Graham was talking about with multiple SIMs and different carriers, right? Geo-redundant capability and backhaul. It's all those failovers, all that backup are the types of things that you're looking for, but it has to be coordinated, right? So, you could have two SIMs in a Cradle Point router, but if you don't have a backup power supply, neither one of the SIMs is going to work if there's no power on the router. So, all of that has to be coordinated. It has to be a full coordinated, plan to make sure that soup to nuts, everything is working the way you really want it to.
I have a question as we're talking about some of these technologies. I'm thinking of like drones or sensors for oxygen and that sort of thing. What have you guys seen in terms of the ease of adoption? And what I mean when I say that is, does it take a disaster situation and some like fatalities and some really bad things to happen for agencies to go, okay, now we'll take you up on this? Or are agencies mostly proactively trying to bring these things on?
I think you'll always find early adopters, Taylor, to some technologies, and some organizations who may be funded in exactly the same way, but with a different structure. It may take something major for them to actually take that plunge and go with some of the new technologies. So I know that doesn't necessarily answer your question, but I think it's both answers are correct in a lot of regards. But
I agree.
Sorry, Rob. Yeah, I think it's part of our jobs and our partners to work alongside to help educate and to move organizations down that digitization sort of journey. Wherever they may be at the moment, it's our job to support that journey so that they do get to that end point.
And to me, that support, to play off what you're saying, Graham, that support really comes from us talking to our customers and finding out Where are their pain points, right? What is something that you're concerned about that, we could fix before there's a disaster? And or before something serious happens, they know a lot of those, probably 95% of them. They know things that happen, unfortunately, are not a surprise. They're unfortunate, but a lot of times they know the risk and they know what causes the risk. The question you have about, does it how do you end up with people adopting it? Does it take a disaster? Sometimes it takes an event to have regulations put in place that force people to do it. So you have, to Graham's point, the early adopters. They recognize the need, they recognize the opportunity. Not to say that they don't want to keep their folks any safer than anybody else, but they also may have funding mechanisms that allow them to do those types of things. Some of these folks don't have that. But once regulations go in, then the grants are applied to the regulations and give them the capability to be able to fund those types of projects.
I'd also say that a lot of organizations are so focused, as they probably should be, on their day-to-day activities. They don't necessarily see any wider. So again, from an education piece, it's our jobs to help support those conversations, to maybe widen that lens a little bit as to what are the risks and what are the implications, therefore, of not doing something, which is probably more important than asking a customer to do something. It's probably more important than to ask them, well, what happens if you don't?
Mm-hmm.
Rob, you mentioned the importance of talking to customers and partners, and Graham, you've said this as well, just having those conversations. But Rob, I think you're part of the Mission Critical Alliance, is that right?
Yes, L3Harris is one of the Mission Critical Alliance partners, correct.
Can you explain a little bit of what that is and kind of how it comes into play with Mission Critical Communications?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, I talked about it a little briefly. I touched on the concept of it earlier when I talked about partners and best of breed partners and interoperability and those types of things. But L3Harris and 7 of the founding members of the Mission Critical Alliance rolled out the alliance in 2019. And the mission of the alliance is to provide customers with mission critical solutions that meet the needs of the customer. So the Mission Critical Alliance is not a L3Harris organization. It's an organization of 21 partners, I believe now. We tend to select best of breed partners to be in the alliance, and partners that have a absolute understanding from a business standpoint of knowing how to work with other partners to provide a solution. So it is us partnering with other folks using standards, using standard interfaces and APIs, providing those APIs where needed, where our products can work together. Not everybody in the Mission Critical Alliance works directly with L3Harris, but most of them do. We're one of the founding members, but we also have customers or partners within the alliance that have developed interfaces between their 2 products that don't have anything to do with us. And so, it's really the capability for a customer to come one-stop shop type thing. We try to do it across different verticals, basically public safety, utilities, whether it be gas or water or electric, or transit, the airports, seaports, mass transit. We focus on those verticals, and that to bring those partners together. So it's we have relationships and we have agreements between the partners for long-term support. We have a Mission Critical Alliance Solution Center in San Antonio at Daly Wells facility there, where we have all of our partners displaying their wares, and we also do testing there. So if someone rolls out a new version of a recorder, Exacom is one of our partners. If Exacom rolls out a new version of their voice recorder and they want to test it with L3Harris, or they want to test it with Tyler Technologies, who's one of our CAD partners, or they want to test it with some other partner, they can do it at the Solution Center. So those are the kind of things we do, where we can go to a customer and say, here's a partnership. You don't have to buy from these guys. We support other logging recorders. We support other CAD vendors, but here are the ones that that are in the alliance and committed to providing mission critical solutions to our customers.
I would think with an alliance like that and just with other conversations that folks like you and Graham are having with customers and partners, there's probably a lot of discussion around 5G and how these networks keep evolving. And I'm curious to hear how you guys see the evolution of 5G and the evolution of IoT and these other emerging technologies, how they impact the landscape of mission critical communication. Like what else is on the horizon?
Graham, I'll start because Cradlepoint is one of our alliance partners, and they're in the Mission Critical Alliance along with their parent company Ericsson. When you talk about 5G, I can't think of two better partners to have as you enter into the 5G world, right? Two of the best of breed manufacturers of not only endpoints but also eNodeBs and EPC cores. They are totally committed to the advancement of 5G. The other thing that I think is important is, our customers are asking about it. We support a narrowband technology, but our technology is a converged technology. So it is converged to narrowband and broadband. And so we basically work with Cradlepoint, we work with Ericsson to help customers understand how do I deploy a 5G network, whether it's carriers or not, or utilizing the carriers, or do I want to provide a private 5G network? So Graham, I'll let you, you're very involved on that side, I know. If you want to add something else there, go ahead.
Good segue, Rob. I think
That's what partners do, Graham.
Thank you. I think Rob has summed it up really well, but I think the biggest thing to reiterate is that the jump from 4G to 5G from a consumer perspective was not really about speeds or bandwidth or latency. So, for example, we could watch a YouTube video on 4G, and it may download a slightly faster on 5G now. But I think the biggest thing is this ability to be able to slice a network. So ultimately in the UK, for example, a police force could own a piece of 5G. So from a connectivity point of view, from a security point of view, from congestion on the network point of view, suddenly the future then opens up from there of what some of these services could do with their own piece of 5G. And I think that's what the networks, and as Rob so eloquently put, the tie-in now between Ericsson and Cradlepoint, it's brilliant for that kind of service as we move into that world.
Well, Rob, Graham, we've taken a lot of your time, and Rob, I know you're joining us on your day off, and Graham, I think
that's all right. Enjoyed
nighttime at your house. So
thank you for the opportunity. It's great talking to you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Great to meet you guys.
See you guys.
I am going to go for that pint now, so thank you.
I gotta say, I just feel like when we talk about mission critical communication, it feels heavy to talk about because it is, in the world of technology, there's so many things that are innovative and so many advancements in all kinds of industries, and everything is important for the people who are using it, right? But when I think of mission critical and talking to these guys, I'm just constantly thinking a solution that we're discussing could be a solution that is literally saving a life. And that just feels heavy to discuss.
Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of the technology advancements for public safety are exactly that, right? Are to increase the situational awareness during emergencies, right? So that the people that are making decisions have enough information to make the right decisions or the best decision to save and protect the most amount of people. And being able to track first responders, police, fire, EMS, to make sure that they're safe in their daily jobs and how to improve their safety and their situational awareness is just one of those things where it's just like incredible to see how they continue to adopt and push technology forward. Unfortunately, because of the need to protect life of of either, the general public or the first responders themselves. And it does result in, technology advancements for the rest of us. But it is, unfortunately, it is heavy. It is understanding that the technologies that people are producing are used in that way is a huge power, but it's also a huge responsibility, because you don't want to fail these people who are sacrificing their health and safety to protect all of us. And so, as someone who works in the technology and kind of develops these solutions, it's a responsibility to make sure that they're robust enough for these use cases.
And I appreciate that we spent so much time discussing the failover and the redundancy, because I think in that industry especially, it's just vital. And I'm thinking about, as Rob was discussing that, I kind of envision it as a ladder. You've got your ideal technology situation. If that doesn't work, what are you falling back to? What are you falling back to? And ultimately, too, I think at the core of all of this is the training and the adoption of the technology and the acceptance of all of these new things and kind of knowing what to do when they go awry. It's a lot that these first responders are taking on,
Well, and not only that, it's not just having those rungs in that ladder, right? But it's the seamless moving between those, right? Mm-hmm. Because when these first responders are in a situation, they need to focus on what they need to do and not focus on whether the technology is working, mm-hmm. right? So it has to work, right? That ideal technology has to work. And then if it doesn't, it has to just move to the next rung. Right? It can't just be fumbling for moving cables or switching Wi-Fi networks or anything like that. It just has to be seamless. It just has to move so that the people that are focusing on the emergency or whatever it is are focusing on that and not trying to troubleshoot the myriad of technology in their vehicle. Because like if you look at, especially here in the U.S., if you look at a police vehicle or you look at a fire truck or you look at an ambulance, it's more than just that purpose mission vehicle. Mm-hmm. It's a rolling office basically now, right? The cameras and the MDT or laptop that they use for dispatch, monitoring the lights and the weapons and the officers and in a police car, monitoring the cage in the back where they keep detainees, as transporting them to jail. So all of these things, are just becoming it's just a rolling office. Yeah. And so, the police officer has to be the police officer, not the IT guy is kind of the point there, right? It's like they can't spend time worrying about whether this stuff's going to work when they need it. But, unfortunately, these things cost money, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the people who are in charge of the purse strings don't necessarily see the value in that redundancy and don't see the value in the backup or don't see the value in these technologies. And so, it is unfortunate that a lot of times that these things are forced through the worst case scenario. Right. Like we talked about, FirstNet came from the tragedy that was September 11th. And unfortunately, it took something like that to push, to have enough political will to push something like FirstNet. And so, I think it's really important for people to see that these technologies are not necessarily, a money grab by technology companies. They are, an evolution of how we can create intelligence and situational awareness in order to improve the safety and improve the working environment for our first responders and make their life better through technology and through advances in technology.
And the good news is now we have a podcast episode about what happens when mission critical communication fails. So the accountants can listen to that to learn a little bit about it. And if you haven't already done so, if you are one of those folks who hasn't listened to it, subscribe to What's Your Signal for more insight about connecting people, places, first responders, vehicles, anything you can think of from anywhere when it matters most. To learn more about powering mission-critical communications, visit cradlepoint.com.